Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how to draw a realistic ear step by step. And what's different about this video today is that I'm going to be showing you guys more real-time footage, and I'm also going to be talking through the process of drawing this ear whilst I'm actually drawing it. So I hope you enjoyed this new style of video. If you do, I'd love to hear your feedback and to see whether you guys would like to see even more of these style videos. So the materials that I'm using for today's drawing is the Derwent graphite pencils in the grades B and also in the grade 5B, and those are all the pencils that I'm using for the video. For blending I'm also using a cotton bud, and for erasing I'm just using a school type eraser. The paper I'm using for today's video is the Strathmore drawing pad paper, and it's fairly cheap, and it doesn't really matter what pencils you use, what drawing paper you use, or what eraser you use, you'll still get very similar results to what I'm getting today. I'll also leave all the materials I'm using in the description in case you guys want to check them out. Anyway guys, let's get on with the tutorial. Okay, so I'm going to start off by working on the sketch, and to do this I'm going to be using the B grade pencil from the Derwent graphic set. And so when I do my sketch, it's really important to look at the individual structures, so I'm just going to be drawing these main outlines and the basic structures, so it's easier to see what we've got to shade in if we've got them all drawn out. So what I recommend when you're doing your sketch is to have your reference photo printed off next to where you're drawing, and to scale it the same size as what you want to draw it, so you can just follow each of the individual lines across and it'll make it a lot easier to sketch it out. So I'm just going to start at the top, and when I'm doing this I'm going to use very light pressure because I don't want my sketch to be too dark. Because when you do realism, it's all about having really soft transitions in shading. You don't want any real harsh lines. So just take your time, try not to rush through this part. Make sure that your sketch is completely accurate before you try to go in and shade it. You don't want to start shading and realise that your sketch isn't quite accurate and there's a bit that's off, because it'll be really hard to erase all of that shading without ruining the paper. So it makes it a lot easier if you think of the shapes as a series of angles. So for example, here it's going straight down, and then if you think about this shape as just a lot of straight angles, so this as an incline, and you can use your pencil to guide it, then it makes it easier, and then you can just join up those angles with a nice curve. And for example, if you need to draw this section, it will help to see if, when you look at the other structures around it, whether they've got an equal distance to what they have in the reference photo. So look at the space relevant to other parts of the reference photo, and also look at the angles. So if you do your sketch slightly too dark, then you can go in with a kneaded eraser and lighten it up after. You still need to be able to see all the lines that you've drawn out, but if they're too harsh or portions of your sketch are a bit darker, then just use a kneaded eraser to lighten up those areas. Otherwise you'll automatically have really harsh lines. Let me know in the comments section if you guys think that you would enjoy seeing more of these real-time kind of videos and me talking through the process while I'm actually drawing it, because a lot of you guys, I get questions saying, you know, why did you do that certain step, and sometimes I forget why I did a certain thing at a specific time, so I think it's nice to be able to talk through why I'm doing each thing as I'm drawing it. So like I said, I'm not too worried about making it absolutely accurate. I just want to get all of the main structures in. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start by blocking in the main shadows. And to do this, I'm using the 5B pencil, and again, it's the Derwent graphic pencil. So I'm just going to start by using circular motions to block in the darkest shadows. And to try and get the shading as smooth as possible, I'm just applying light pressure and going in circular motions, and I'll keep overlapping the same areas. So what I like about graphite pencils are that they blend really easily. So there's loads of different things you can use to blend them. So you could use, say, your fingers, but I don't recommend that if you want to sell your work, because it might not be archival if you get lots of grease on the paper from your hands. You could also use a cotton bud, but only use that for slightly large areas, not for tiny details. If you need to blend out small details, then just use a small paintbrush. That works really well. And if you need to blend out really large areas, then I recommend using a bit of tissue. So what's going to make your drawing look really realistic is two things: making your blending quite seamless and really subtle transitions, and also having a really good contrast. So having a few really dark darks and then having a few like bright highlights. So just having a nice contrast between your highlights and your shadows. I can always go back and add in some more shadows later on. Okay, so now I'm going in with that B grey pencil, and I'm just going to use that to ease those shadows into these areas where I haven't put any graphite. Because as you can see on the reference photo, this area isn't completely white. There's some soft shading as well. And even the brightest highlights aren't completely white. They're just really light values of grey. So I'm trying to leave the main highlighted areas blank for the moment, because when we blend it out, some of the graphite will go onto these areas where we haven't added any graphite, so they will get a bit of value added to them. But like I said, they're only very light grey, so we don't need to apply graphite straight onto them at the moment. So the more graphite you have down, the more you will be able to blend it to get really smooth shading. That doesn't mean that it has to be really dark. You can just use really light grade graphite pencils like a 4H or even lighter. And when you apply quite a lot of this pencil to certain areas, even though it will have a really light tone, when you shade it out, there's enough of that graphite to blend and like smudge around. Very much like when you use colour pencils and you want to blend with solvent. You need to actually have the pigment down in order to blend something out. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with the cotton bud and I'm going to start blending it out very lightly. I don't want to lose all the definition and individual shadows that I've created, so I'm just going to go very lightly, just to kind of smooth out the individual pencil lines. And also to blend some of this graphite onto those highlighted areas, so they're not just blank anymore. I wouldn't recommend using a tissue for this part just because I think it's too large of a surface to try and blend out details. But I suppose if you fold it into a small corner, then it will make it easier. So you can see that it's really smoothing out the graphite. This really helps to get rid of all the harsh lines, so we have a nice smooth canvas to work with. And then we can add more definition to certain areas if we need to. If your cotton bud is building up with too much graphite and it's getting too saturated, then make sure you use a new one. Otherwise, when you go on to blend in the lighter areas, it could deposit more graphite than you want it to. But mine seems okay for now. To try and blend out these harsh lines, I like to put my cotton bud directly in the middle of where the line meets, and then if I blend it, it kind of softens out that edge. So the more pressure you apply onto the cotton bud, the more you're going to lose that detail. So I'm trying to avoid applying too much pressure as much as possible. So I'm just blending out. I just put this here to see the value compared to this area, so I knew how dark I needed to go. Okay, so that is the first layer blended out, and now we're going to go and deepen some shadows and then add highlights. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start building up even more of the shadows and start darkening up certain areas. So for example, I'm going to start darkening up this area and this area as well. So to do this, I'm using the 5B pencil and I sharpened it again It's really important to make sure that you're keeping your pencil sharp. So I recommend investing in a good pencil sharpener that helps get your graphite pencils to a sharp point. So now, because I want it really dark, I'm applying a lot more pressure. Okay, so now moving on to the ear, I'm first going to start in this area. And I'm using very light circular motions, and I'm going to build up the shadows very gradually. I'm paying attention to the reference photo because it's really easy to overdo the shadows, which you really don't want to do. So to do this, I'm barely applying any pressure to the actual pencil. Because it's such a soft lead, it comes off really, really nicely. So this area needs to be a lot darker, and it's quite a crisp edge as well. So I'm going to give a harsher edge here because that's what it's like in a reference photo. But if there isn't a harsh edge, then don't just draw one in for the sake of it, because most of the time the transitions are very soft. Okay, so now I've got in the really dark shadows, I'm going to continue adding shadows, but with the B grade pencil instead, because not all of these shadows are really, really dark. And if you try and use the 5B for the slightly lighter shadows, then it will just look grainy. So I'm using the B grade pencil. And I'm going to first start by rendering this area here. So also you can see that this is quite a harsh edge as well. And here is far too soft, so I need to draw in that edge again. But then you can see when it gets to about here, it becomes a lot softer. So now that I've done that, I'm going to focus on this middle piece here. And this is a very peculiar piece of skin because there's certain highlights and then there's really shadowed areas as well. So it's really important that you get this right to make sure it looks correct. But just really follow what you see and it should be fine. You can always erase areas if they get too dark, and darken areas if they're too light. So don't be intimidated by the fact that it's an ear if you're really struggling drawing ears. Just think of it as a series of shapes that you've got to draw in, and that might help you break out of feeling scared to draw ears. I know with me, it was always hands that I really struggled with. And even now, it's one of the things that I get most nervous to draw because I've had in the past, it's not been the best thing that I could draw. So it's that kind of automatic worry that it's not going to turn out well. And especially if you've done the rest of the drawing really well and then you get to the hands, you get scared because you don't want to ruin all the good work that you've done. But just think of it as a series of shapes that you've got to draw. Don't think of it as the fact that you're drawing an ear, or if it's hands, don't think about it as the fact that you're drawing a hand. Okay, so I've just moved on to working on the shadows up here. And it's all of these subtle little shadows that are really going to make your drawing look realistic. To identify them and to include them in your work. Don't worry if it's not popping out of the page at the moment because we haven't done the highlights. And that's normally the part of the drawing that makes your piece pop the most when you add in those really bright highlights. Okay, so now I'm just going to go in and use the cotton bud and slightly blend out certain areas that I just want to be a bit more subtle. But I'm not going to try and overblend because this might get rid of some of the edges and definition that I just created. So I'm just doing a very light touch of the cotton bud onto the graphite. But don't worry if you do lose some of your defined edges, because you can just go back in and add a bit more of the pencil, which I probably will have to do as well. Okay, so one thing that I do want to do before I go in and add the highlights is just where these really dark areas are. When I just blended it, you lost a bit of definition between this and it's suddenly gone really soft, and these are just really defined. So I'm just going to add a bit of the B grade pencil to make a softer transition. It's just too harsh at the moment. But I'm still looking at the reference photo. I'm not just applying this anywhere. So now you can see that that's a bit more subtle in this area. Just going to do it around here as well. And I'm also defining this line a bit more because it's a bit more defined in the reference photo. Okay, so now that I've done all of the shadows and I'm happy with how all the contrast looks with the shadows, I'm now going to go in and just finally add the highlights. And to do this, just to show you that you don't need really expensive materials to do this, I'm just going to use a really cheap, school grade eraser. And what I'm going to do to get a more fine point is just take my Stanley knife, and I'm just going to use this to slightly cut off the edge to create more of a sharp point rather than having just this really inaccurate, not precise edge. Okay, so now I've got more of a precise edge. You can still do it even more precise if you want to, but I think this will work for me for now. Actually, I might just cut off this edge as well. Okay, so now I'm going to just really lightly erase the highlights. So I'm barely going to touch the eraser to the paper, and it will lift off probably far more than you need it to, but that's okay because we can go in and then use our cotton bud to slightly add a bit of colour over it. And as I get towards the end, I'll slowly release the pressure and try and fade it into the areas around it, so it's not such a harsh highlight and it kind of tapers off like that. Do the same up here. So I go in and first block in the harsh highlight, and then I just taper it off to the area around it. So once I've finished all these highlights, it will look really, really harsh. But it's supposed to. Just make sure you go back in with your cotton bud and soften it out a bit. To be even more precise, you can use like the Tombow Mono Eraser, which is really good. It's just a really thin eraser, like a stick eraser, and you can use that and that will be really, really precise. Or if you don't want to lift off as much and do it this way, you can just use a kneaded eraser and slowly just use that to lift off and lighten certain areas. That won't give you such a harsh edge to work with. I haven't got one on me at the moment, so that's why I'm just using this cheap eraser. Also, this works with any types of pencils. You don't need to just have the pencils I'm using, but I would recommend that you have a softer grade pencil, like a 4B, a 5B, or even darker, and then a lighter one, so like a B or a HB. But you can do it with just the two pencils, a normal eraser, and a cotton bud. So it's very cheap, very affordable, and you can still get really good results. And it doesn't really matter too much about what paper you use. I'm not using mega expensive paper for this drawing. I'm just using a normal drawing pad paper. It's nothing particularly special. Happy with that so far. Just use a brush to knock off all the eraser dust. And now I'm just going to go in, and I'm actually going to go in with a clean cotton bud. So I'm just going to use a clean one, and I'm just going to use it to slightly add some graphite to the highlighted areas. Tone it down a bit. Certain areas you can tone down a bit less. So say here I'm just going to use cotton bud on the edges and try to leave a bit more of a highlighted area in the middle. You can always make it a bit more contrasty than the reference photo. It will make it look more eye-catching, so just leave the shadows slightly darker than the reference photo and the highlights a bit brighter, and it will just add a bit more contrast, just make it pop a bit more. But don't add too much, otherwise it might not look realistic. It might just look a bit too much, too fake, and a bit cartoony maybe. You can also lightly erase any shadows that you think went a bit too dark. So like that area, I think it was a bit too intense, but there was a bit more of an intense line. So here, so I'm just gonna add that in like that. And that's it for today's video. I hope you found that useful, and please do let me know if you found having a more real-time, slower, and also hearing me talk through the process whilst drawing it useful. Let me know and I will do more videos like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. I'll leave all of the materials that I use in the description below as well if you want to purchase them or check them out. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!